Welcome to the podcast. I am pleased to bring onto the show Sean Chen, who is involved in a Kickstarter program. Now, as a first-time guest, Sean, I always like to ask a person's comic book origin story, how they got the comic books and made them a lifelong fan. So I want to hear your origin story.
Okay. I actually didn't read comics growing up. I think I
Really?
would have loved them, but my parents really didn't allow them in the house. But I did love superheroes from watching them on television, like the cartoons, and we get the Washington Post, which was allowed in the house. And I think daily you can get the Spider-Man strip there, and that was my favorite. And on Sunday you get the color version, the longer form one. So that really started my love for the typical like male power fantasy that it's superheroes. Um, and then I also like to draw, and I'm very classically trained as an artist. And my favorite subject to draw was the superhero stuff. Um, but my first real comic that I read and that really blew my mind and made me want to be in the industry was Heavy Metal magazine. Because strangely enough, comic books at that time were really in the specialty stores, the comic book stores. And I just didn't go there because it just really wasn't in my neighborhood route that there's be a comic book store. But there was the mall, and the mall had the Borders books that had the magazine rack that had, up in the right hand corner, there's the Playboy magazine or Penthouse with a loose side cover, so you can't see the cover of it. Right next to it was the Heavy Metal magazine, and when I looked at that, that really blew my mind, particularly because it was a European style. It was more what I was used to being classically trained. The American superhero style, the dynamic Jack Kirby look, is something that's a little bit unusual if you didn't grow up with it. So I like Milo Manera and Mobius and all those European artists, and that made me want to draw comics. So I practiced a lot and got a portfolio together, and brought it to a lot of different conventions, finally culminating at the San Diego Comic-Con. And so I hung out quite a bit with David Mazzucchelli when I met him at a show, a local show. And then he kind of took me under his wing and taught me all about how comics are done in the great medium of American superhero comics. And that was a great education. And then I showed a portfolio at San Diego Comic-Con to Valiant Comics. Yeah.
So what made you decide growing up that I want to be a comic book artist? Was there some kind of defining moment, or is there something that you always thought growing up that I'm an artist and that's what I want to do in growing up? Is that how was it for you?
I like to draw a lot, and I think the superhero world was it would seem like the most fun thing to draw. So as a classically trained artist, you draw like a lot of still lifes and landscapes, but I mean that really pales in comparison, especially to a kid, to drawing like Superman or like Spider-Man, and then telling us a cool story with it using a narrative. So that was really the reason why I chose comics more than any other form of art.
Now, I know who you are, but you know that the comic book fans cycle every few years. So for anybody that's new who the heck is Sean Chen? Tell them a little bit about yourself, what you've done, and that type of thing before we go on to your Kickstarter.
Okay, so
Please.
I started out at Valiant Comics, and my first comic there was Rye in the Future Force #9, and that one sold because of market forces at the time about 900,000 copies. Um, so that
That
was
was
kind of like
impressive
my
at time.
yeah.
That's big for now. I mean, a lot of companies, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but a lot of companies now would like kill to have that type of numbers all the time. It shows you how different the
Yeah.
industry is between now and then. But please
Yeah,
go
I
on.
should make it clear that it's not because of my special ability. It really was the company I was at and the book I was on at the time I was there. It didn't really matter who they put in that place. They would have done well just because we were in the midst of a bubble in comics where um, sales were just typically through the roof on new comics, especially for a hot company. And Valiant at that time was the hot company. So it was just really luck and timing that I was there for that. And then, unfortunately, it's been downhill ever since, because we don't have anywhere near those sales. Um, so,
But
I
I'm
did my
sorry.
time there.
But it almost feels like we're actually almost in a golden age of comic books again because there's so many things that are out there and so many types of comic books and so many things. We may not have the sales and the volume of them, but there's so many fantastic things that are coming out that weren't possible a few years ago. For example, your Evermind Kickstarter that you've got going on right now. And tell the fans a little bit about the project, who you teamed up with, and why you're doing this project.
Okay, so I think every artist, when you are moving up, you kind of go through Marvel and DC, and that's a lot of times considered the pinnacle of your career, like how far you can possibly go. But there's really one step more, which is to make your own characters and make your own stories and have your own intellectual properties. So you're drawing actually your own characters rather than characters that belong to Marvel and DC. There was a publisher from 24/7 Comics approached me to see whether I had any story ideas. So I pitched them an idea that I've kind of had for a while, that based on this drawing of a robot girl and a robot gorilla, and he thought it would really make an intriguing story. So we kind of like workshopped that idea over several months, and then finally started it going. And I think it's when we got to about issue 2 or 2.5. Well, actually, when I first started out, I asked him who he thought the main character should look like, because we were kind of developing it together. And he said, like, can you draw Daniel Wu as the main character? I was like, sure, why not? So that was how that decision just happened very quickly. So around issue 2.5, he says that, well, I know Daniel Wu's people. I would like to actually show them this and see whether he'd want to get involved. And that was kind of a long shot, but he showed it to him, and then he liked the story, he liked the character, and then he was on board. So he was on board as a co-creator. And so what he brings to the table is that actors are intrinsically attuned to character and motivation, because that's how they develop a nuanced performance for their TV show or movie. So he really brought a lot of character to a sci-fi story. And, sci-fis can often be very plot-based, very action-based. So he brought the character element, and together, I think it's a great mix, and it really works well.
It is a great, fantastically unique comic book. So briefly, what is 247 Comic Books all about? I've never heard of them. Why haven't other fans heard about them?
Okay, so they're very new. Actually, this is their first book.
Okay.
So they do have a roster of about 10 different books kind of in the pipeline that will come out eventually over the next few years. So yeah, they're very new, and they're very creator focused. So I think there's a lot of talk now about how artists and writers are just wanting to be treated fairly and then make a living wage. So this company like puts that in the forefront, and also like really seeks to mine the creativity of anyone who has a great story idea, whether it comes from an artist or a writer or whatever. And then so they're just basically a new publishing company that's very creator focused.
Is this your first attempt at writing something, or have you done writing before?
Okay, that's interesting, because before Evermind, I did write one other thing. However, I've been an artist for a couple of decades, and I never really knew whether I could write. I had a tremendous amount of interest in writing, but I didn't really know whether I could do it. So that's about when I discovered Instagram. So I did put together a comic book and just put it out on Instagram for free, like every couple of weeks, maybe 5 more pages. And it was just an experiment. And I didn't expect it to go that well because the subject matter was very offbeat. And I would only continue it if the comments section were very positive. If they wanted to see more, I would draw more. And it seems like the more I did, it would seem to build up momentum. Eventually, till I got about 60 pages done and the story concluded. And after that, people were very satisfied and emotionally satisfied with the story, and they liked it. And then it got published in 2 places after that. One of them was Heavy Metal Magazine, who colored it and published it in one of their publications. And then the other one was this company called Next Chapter Post, also published it. So that to me was really strange, because as an artist, I didn't really know whether I would have the chops to write, but it seems like it went over very well, and that kind of helped inform my decision to kind of strike off on my own as a writer.
So what type of fan would enjoy backing your Evermind Kickstarter? Okay,
well, if you read comics, this is very different than a lot of comics out there, because first of all, instead of superheroes, it's sci-fi based in the near future. And I think a lot of comics, especially from Marvel or DC, they kind of churn them out, because it's a product that comes out every month. And basically, the writer would spend maybe only a couple of weeks determining what each issue is going to be about. With this one, it takes a very like hardcore story approach, using the techniques and principles of traditional storytelling, and it's put together over a period of a year and a half. So it's very highly concentrated, written more like a screenplay. So you get a lot of good stories with like a lot of big ideas. So there's a few, maybe 3, 4 really big creative ideas in it that are kind of novel and you haven't really seen them before. And then when the story moves forward, it kind of develops a momentum where when you read the first one, you kind of have to read them all. So it has that type of, it's not just there to be on the shelf for a month. It really is like a graphic novel, and it's written very carefully. And I think people will really get into it if they give it a try.
As a creator, as an artist, were you trying to do something differently than you've done over the years in some of your other comic book projects? I mean, was there a certain creative challenge that you wanted to do with your art and stuff?
Well, with the art, I was always very highly technical with my art. So this is why I ended up on Iron Man, all the high-tech stuff and the armor. And that seemed to be the wheelhouse where I was like most known for. So this is a very like robot-centric book. It's a very tech future-centric book. So there is that. And then since this is my baby, you tend to do your best work on it. And I spent a little bit more time on the artwork, and I drew it very carefully and very methodically. So there is a lot of the best work that I've done is in this. And then on top of that, the story that I wrote, that knowing where the story is going, it helps inform the artwork. Whereas a lot of times when I'm working on a Marvel book, I have no idea where the writer's going. So you really can't take a bold swing with your artwork and your environment, because you never really know whether you're going to cause some problems down the line. So the synergy between being the writer and the artist really helps the product in the end.
I was going over this. I was comparing some of your other art, and any Sean Chen fans out there, and I'm sure there's plenty of them, will see you're right. This art is different. You can see that you put your heart and soul into making it somewhat unique and different, because it is your project. It is your baby. It's a very impressive comic book, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on here. So
thank you.
I know there seems to be a lot of Asian American themes running into it with some of the characters, and you are an Asian American. How do you feel about Asian American representation, both as creators and as characters in the comic books? I found it interesting that over the years, Amadeus Choi, I think that's the name they pronounce it, has slowly risen up in the Marvel ranks to be a little more prominent. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. But it's like, where's the other one? Not to go too much off kill, but I did a bunch of shows in August about centering around Black creators, and some of these creators are like, when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of Black creators, or when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of Black superheroes. And when you go into the 70s, a lot of them Black superheroes seemed like token superheroes and not real superheroes. So as an Asian American, how do you feel about that type of thing in the comic books today and over time?
Well, my approach is that, I created this story, and the characters at first were kind of just basically blank templates, and their character were only in the broad stroke phase. That's when I asked Carl Choi, my publisher, like who he would like to cast as the main character. And then he picked a person who was Asian. And that's as far as my intent in putting an Asian person in. I think one of the best things you can do is that when you have characters like a hero or a villain, that they can be any race. And this is kind of testament to that, because I didn't have any particular person in mind. He mentioned someone who was Asian, and then boom, he was Asian. So I really didn't really mean anything with it. I mean, the whole family in the story are scientists. So, they're just, very good at science, which is a trope, but that was never intentional. And I think one of the best things you can do with heroes and the villain is just make them agnostic, like they can be any race, because anyone can be very good or very bad. Particularly with the villains, these days you have to be very careful how you cast that. But for me, I just think that they could be any race, and then whatever happens, happens. As far as being an Asian creator, a lot of people say like that we're not that significantly represented in this industry, but that's not really true from an artist standpoint, because tons of comic book artists are Asian. And Yeah, I'm not sure why that's very diverse. And then the writing part is not so much. There's very few Asian writers. And I think that could be attributed to the fact that, uh, art and writing is subjective, but you can tell when a comic portfolio comes in, whether a person can draw or not. There's a minimum level of ability where you have to achieve to make a viable comic. And then, so you just can't hire your white friend or cousin if you wanted to. You have to go to the person who can do the job. And there's so few of them, so you have to kind of go all over the world to find the best artists wherever they are. I mean, so many of them, like you have to go sometimes to the Philippines because whoever can do the job, well, that's who you hire. So I'm not sure what that says about writing, in that maybe writing is also subjective. Maybe the standards of writing are lower in comics, but you can hire just about anyone to write a comic if they do their hard work of just studying the character and then doing their best. And I guess that's the reason why that tends not to diversify as much. So in this, I'm an artist, so I wanted to write my own story. I'm Asian, so I am now an Asian comic book writer, and no one really gave me that opportunity. It's one of those things I have to kind of create and put it out there and see whether people will accept me as a writer. I mean, if they like the story, then good.
Personally, I respect everybody for who and what they are. It makes no difference whether they're Asian, Black, and female. I want to read fantastic comic books that look great. And you've done a fantastic job on this. And I'm really impressed with it. I really like it. And I'm so glad that it's turning out the way you want it. I'm curious though, are you a movie buff?
I am actually. That's where most of my love for story comes from. I mean, I'm a lot like a lot of people. I don't read as much as I could, mostly because I spend so much time drawing. But I do love movies. They're just a lot easier just to get into. And especially like at the end, how the story makes you feel. If it's written very well, it can, it can really bring you to tears. And I thought that the power to be able to do that and to craft a story like that makes me feel the same way or would make other people feel the same way, I thought was an incredible power. So I would study movies relentlessly. But I think what you're probably thinking about is the cover to issue 2, where there's a robot that's kind of in a Marilyn Monroe pose. That really is just because that kind of trope exists out there. Like that Marilyn Monroe pose I've never seen that movie, but
you've never seen that movie. That's you really need to take your time to see that movie. That is one of the good movies. Have you ever seen Some Like It Hot? That movie?
I have not. No.
Oh, you've got to go get it. If we're growing up, you've got to go see Some Like It Hot. It's one of the best Marilyn Monroe movies out there. It's one of the best comedies of all time. Sean, you got that? That's your homework assignment. No, and
okay.
Also because your robot also reminds me of the Metropolis movies from the early 1920s. Also,
okay,
and I saw some things. I just wonder how that was filtering through. So you were also at the New York Convention this week, correct? You're at the New York.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So how's the convention scene changed for you over the years? Because you've been in this industry for quite a while now. So how's it changed? Because when I was reading back in the 90s, we had like Amazing Heroes and Wizard and the Comic Buyer Guy. There wasn't no internet. There wasn't no 24/7 news feed. Because like a lot of people, one of the things I do, I go on to the comic book says, "Oh, what's the news? What's the news? What's the news?" And I'm instantly there. Back when you started, there wasn't anything like that, and even the fan base was different. So how's this convention scene changed differently for you as a creator?
I've been through all different eras of conventions. So yeah, you're right. In the beginning, since there were fewer of them, I think Wizard put on a lot of them. Those attracted a lot of people, and that's kind of when I started out, when comics were selling really well. Going to a convention, it was a big deal. It was a lot of money to be made. And then I've been to some very lean times when a lot of conventions came on the scene, and it was really hard to keep a convention afloat because I guess interest in comics was kind of waning. And that was really sad because I remember going to a convention and just the number one fear is that this is most likely going to be another convention where I just sit the entire day and then no one comes by and the room is kind of empty and everyone's really sad and depressed. And then, flash forward a little bit, the cosplayers enter the scene, and there was always cosplayer, but now it's really blown up, and I love it. A lot of artists and creators don't like the cosplay just kind of entering in their industry, but Comic-Cons can be so many things, and just to see the aisles packed and the lines to get in, I think that's fantastic. I think it's very healthy. If it did mean involving cosplayers, animation, manga, gaming, and movies, just to be an all-around kind of like nerd convention or like a nerd parade, that I think that's fine because it just brings a lot of people in and it creates an energy, and people can go to a convention for any number of reasons. And the fact that they're healthy again, I think is fantastic. So that's one of the things I noticed is like before there was very few cosplayers, and now they're everywhere. And then manga is everywhere, and then the movies and TV and games have come in to kind of prop the whole thing up. And the comics has sort of been marginalized, and they still call them Comic Cons, but I'll take it in any way because I've seen the very lean times, and that wasn't very fun.
So overall, have you been surprised or pleased? What was your comment or thoughts about doing this Evermind Kickstarter? Because it's only got a few more days left. It's pretty much fully funded. I mean, how has been the reaction on your end? I mean, have you been really pleased with how fans have been, attached to it, and have you got a lot of good word of mouth over it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are 3 times our goal. And this is my first Kickstarter and my company's first Kickstarter. So there's usually a big learning curve. And then usually the first Kickstarters are not as supportive as the later ones. I'm not sure what that is, but the more you do, the more people trust you, I guess, and the more you build an audience. So we are thrilled with how it all went over. And I think the biggest challenge is there is no track record of my writing out there. Like I think people know what to expect of my artwork. So they'll say like, well, he has a name and I know his work. But the story, you can kind of expect a lot of times, since an artist is writing his own story, to be very suspect of it. I think the story is the strongest selling point, but there's really nothing I can do because this is the first one, and then it's going to be a leap of faith. So I can just tell people like, give it a shot because I think you'll like it.
Oh, they will. They definitely will. You should be very pleased that you've reached this pinnacle in your career, and because not all artists are writers, just like not all writers are artists, and you should be very. This is a fantastic project. It's really well written. Well, I think fans of, even if you're not into superhero, I think fans would really enjoy this comic book because not all comic books today are superhero, and people need to get out of that trope of it's just Marvel and DC and the big stuff. There's so many things out there, and projects like this with your name attached to it. Oh, I've never read a science fiction comic book or comic book like this, but this is Sean Chen. Oh, this is great. Now that opens up windows for people to explore things outside of their comfort zone as far as comic books. And that's another reason why I want to bring you on the show, because you're known for your Marvel stuff. And I think you only did like one big thing for DC, Salvation Run. That was your big thing for DC. I don't know what your beef is with DC, but that's okay. No, but yeah, I want people just to read comic books and explore things. Just don't. It's not all about Superman and Batman and X-Men and Spider-Man. There's so many fantastic comic books out there. So when this Kickstarter gets done, where do you go from here? What's your next project? Anything else coming down the pike going on? Where does Evermind go?
It's been so much about it's been so much about this book that I really haven't given much thought to what happens afterwards. So I kind of write this like a screenplay, mostly because what I learned about writing is mostly from a lot of master classes and tutorials on writing screenplays. So I do have a conclusion to this, like it would be a movie conclusion. However, the company I'm working for requests that I finish the story arc, but leave the character arc open for more episodes or issues. So it sounds like they're interested in doing more with it. And I don't know if that would be me that's involved. And I'm kind of looking at what may come afterwards, but I still have the second half of this book to finish up, and really don't like to think too far ahead because it's already a daunting task just finishing out this book.
Before we wrap this, I have one quick more question. Is there a reason why you chose a gorilla for one of the main characters?
I always like drawing them. I think when I see pictures of gorillas, as an artist, I try to see the shapes and the planes to kind of build the drawing off structurally. It's very hard to do that in human beings. But some animals, particularly gorillas, can be reduced down to basic shapes very easily, and they look extremely cool when you focus on the planes that catch the light in certain ways. I just like the way they look, and apparently people like the way they look too, because there's a trope where gorillas and comics seem to go together.
That's what I was mentioning, because back in the Silver Age, DC found out that whenever they put a gorilla on the cover, or even used the color purple on the cover, them comic books sold out like hotcakes, to the point where they actually had to ration up. No, you can't have a gorilla on the cover. This book, we got too many gorillas on the cover. So I was just curious about that fact of, of why you chose a gorilla. Yeah, it was at one time. And because folks, you don't understand, I don't get off there, but back a long time ago, there wasn't a direct market. Comic books went to your grocery stores and those types of things, and you waited months for sales figures to come in. It wasn't like you went to the comic shop where I want this, I'm going to order this, I'm going to order this, and it wasn't like that. It would be 6 to 9 months before comic books came back, and you would know that this sold, but you wouldn't know why it was sold. And that was one of the things with the gorillas. They would keep throwing these gorillas on the covers. They're like, it sold, and they never knew that. Sean Chen, before we wrap this up, you get the last words. Any closing comments?
I really want people to give this book a try, because there's no way I can. There's no track record of my writing, so I can understand just being a little bit cautious about it. But I want to say that if you know my artwork, and if you like my artwork, I would say the artwork is not even the best thing about it, because I did take a real deep dive into writing. I wrote this with a lot of passion, and there's a lot of energy in the pages. And when you read it, it'll just kind of like crackle with this passion and energy. And the writing, it's written in a way using story brain science that really propels you along. And most people in the early beta reader testers that we did give this book to, they would binge read it, like go from beginning to end, only really intending to read the first issue, but they had to read the rest, and then there's a cliffhanger and they want to see more. And that's really the best compliment that I can get, is that people were engaged with the story. So
the story
I
is
just
fantastic.
Put that out there, and hope that just trust me, give it a try, and then you'll get into it.
Sean Chen, having an Evermind Kickstarter going on for the next few days. Thank you for joining me with the show. It's been a very fascinating conversation. I will try to figure a way to get you back on the podcast. Good luck, and I hope to have you sometime soon.
Great. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. So thank you very much for the